The morning started like any other, but something in the house felt heavy, almost tense, as if the walls could sense what was coming. The rich man woke up earlier than usual, unable to sleep because of the countless thoughts swirling in his head. For weeks he had been dealing with problems he never expected. His investments were dropping, business partners were avoiding his calls, and the pressure of holding everything together was beginning to feel impossible. He sat on the edge of his large bed, staring at the floor, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had everything people admired from the outside: wealth, a big home, a successful business, but inside, he felt tired in a way that sleep could not fix. He rubbed his eyes and let out a long sigh, wondering how much longer he could pretend that everything was under control. When he finally walked out of his room, he found the maid quietly cleaning the hallway. She greeted him politely, as she always did, but he barely nodded. He wasn't in the mood for conversation. He went downstairs to the dining room, expecting to find his breakfast waiting exactly the way he liked it. But that morning, something small went wrong, something so small that most people wouldn't have cared. His briefcase wasn't on the table where he always left it. He looked around, irritated, already feeling his patience thinning. The maid walked in, holding a cloth in her hand, ready to wipe the table. He asked her where the briefcase was, and she told him gently that she had placed it near his office so he wouldn't forget it later. It was meant to help him, but he didn't see it that way. He felt as if everything in his life was slipping out of place, and this tiny change somehow pushed him over the edge. He snapped without thinking. His voice rose as he told her she should not move his things without asking. The maid stood there quietly, not saying anything back, not defending herself. She just lowered her eyes and listened. Her silence only made him more frustrated. It felt like life kept throwing things at him, and she just happened to be standing there at the wrong moment. He complained about how nothing in his house was ever done the way he wanted, how people around him didn't understand the pressure he was under. The maid stayed still, her hands folded politely, her expression calm even though the words must have stung. She didn't argue. She didn't say he was being unfair. She didn't even sigh. She just nodded gently. That angered him even more. He walked out of the room quickly, muttering under his breath. As he passed her, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Her eyes looked tired, as if she hadn't slept enough. But he brushed the thought away. He told himself he had more important things to worry about. Down in the living room, 2 other staff members were arranging fresh flowers. They gave each other a look when the rich man entered the room, a look that said, "He's in one of his moods again." He ignored them and kept walking toward the door. He could feel the tension behind him, the way people were starting to tiptoe around him because they never knew when he would lose his temper again. Outside, his driver greeted him with a polite good morning, but even that simple greeting annoyed him. He sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the car pulled out of the driveway. The entire way to work, he replayed the morning incident in his mind, as if the small mistake with the briefcase was proof that nothing was going right. By the time he reached his office, his mood had already poisoned his entire day. Meetings felt longer, numbers looked worse, and even the slightest delay felt like a personal attack. His employees exchanged nervous looks whenever he walked by, whispering quietly when they thought he couldn't hear them. They knew he had a short temper, but lately, it had become unpredictable. During lunch, he sat alone in his large office, picking at his food without really eating. His mind was too cluttered with worries. He kept thinking about the business decisions he had made, wondering if he had pushed too hard, if he had trusted the wrong people, or if he was finally facing the consequences of ignoring warnings he once brushed off. But even with all those thoughts swirling around, part of him kept returning to the morning incident. Why did that moment bother him so much? Why did he snap at someone who didn't deserve it? He tried to reason with himself. He told himself that he was stressed, that anyone in his position would react the same way. But deep down, he knew it wasn't a good excuse. The maid had worked for him for years. She had always shown respect. She never talked back, never complained, never said anything harsh, even when others joked behind his back about his attitude. She simply did her job and kept the house running smoothly. Yet she became the target of his frustration that morning. Hours later, as the sun began to set, he gathered his things to head home. The day hadn't gotten any better. In fact, it felt like everything he touched turned into more problems. He rubbed his forehead as he walked to the car, feeling the beginning of a headache. When he reached home, the house felt quieter than usual. The staff moved around more carefully, as if they were trying not to disturb him. He didn't blame them. He knew he had created an atmosphere where everyone felt uneasy. Even though he didn't want to admit it, he felt a small ache of guilt. He wasn't a bad person, but lately he had allowed stress to change him into someone he didn't recognize. He walked into the kitchen and saw the maid standing at the counter, cutting vegetables for dinner. She paused when she saw him, offering a small, polite smile. He didn't return the smile. He wasn't ready for that yet. But he noticed again her eyes looked tired, heavy, as if she had been holding in emotions all day. He felt an uncomfortable tug in his chest, but he quickly looked away, pretending not to see. He didn't want to deal with feelings. Feelings made him vulnerable, and he had spent years building walls around himself. He walked past her without saying anything, but the silence felt louder than words. Later that night, as he sat alone in his study, he replayed the entire day in his mind. He wondered how things had gotten so bad, his business, his mood, even his relationships with the people around him. He had money, a big house, and everything people dream of having, yet he felt more alone than ever for the first time in a long while. He wondered if he was pushing away the only people who still cared about him. He remembered the maid's calm expression in the morning, the way she didn't argue or defend herself. He remembered her tired eyes. Something about that image stayed with him. He told himself again that he was just stressed, but even he didn't believe it anymore. He didn't know it yet, but this small moment, this little crack in his emotions, was the beginning of a much bigger realization. A realization that would change not only the way he saw others, but the way he saw himself. And while he sat there in the quiet room, trying to understand what was happening inside him, the maid was in the kitchen finishing her tasks slowly, quietly, and with the same patience she showed every day, still caring. Even when he didn't notice, that little did he know, she was dealing with her own struggles, her own silent battles, ones she hid from everyone, including him, and the days ahead would show him something he had forgotten long ago sometimes. The people we treat the worst are the ones who care about us the most. The next few days passed slowly, almost quietly, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence people used when they were trying not to upset someone. The rich man moved around his own house like a storm people wanted to avoid. Every time he entered a room, the staff straightened up a little too quickly, spoke a little too softly, and stepped aside as if he were something fragile that might break at any moment. But the maid wasn't like the others. She didn't act scared of him. She didn't walk on eggshells. She simply continued her work with the same gentle patience she had shown since the day she started. She didn't flinch when he walked by. She didn't rush to get out of his way. She just treated him normally, something that confused him more than anything else. One morning, he found the maid in his office, quietly organizing his desk. She had placed all the documents in neat piles and put small sticky notes on the ones that needed his attention. His favorite pen, the one he thought he had lost last week, was lying in the center of the table with a small note beside it that simply said, "Found this under the chair." He stared at the note for a moment, feeling something he couldn't explain. The kindness was so small, so ordinary, but it touched him in a way he didn't expect. He almost wanted to say thank you, but the words got stuck in his throat. He cleared his voice instead and walked out without saying anything. He didn't realize she had noticed. She always noticed. Later that day, the house felt unusually warm. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread, something the maid made whenever she felt the house needed comfort. He looked toward the kitchen door, watching her quietly clean the counter. She didn't know he was watching. He noticed how she moved slower than before, almost as if she was tired. Her shoulders looked tense, and she had been rubbing her wrist, as if it hurt. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but he hesitated. What if she thought he suddenly wanted to start a conversation? What if she thought he cared? What if she thought he was trying to apologize? He wasn't sure he was ready for that. Not yet. He walked away again. The other staff members weren't as patient. When they were alone, they whispered about him. They muttered about his temper, his mood swings, and how working in the house had become exhausting. He overheard part of a conversation while walking down the hallway. One staff member said, "If he keeps going like this, I'm leaving. I can't handle this stress every day." The other replied, "Same here. I didn't sign up to be yelled at for nothing." He stopped walking, hiding behind the corner so they wouldn't see him. Their words stung more than he expected. He felt like someone had thrown cold water at his face. He was their employer, their boss, someone they should look up to, but instead, they feared him. They were tired of him. He wasn't angry at them. He was angry at himself. But before he walked away, he heard another voice join the conversation. The maid had stepped into the hallway. She spoke softly, but her voice carried a calm strength. "Please don't say that. He's not a bad person. He is just under too much pressure right now. Sometimes people act out when they're hurting." The other staff members fell silent. One of them sighed. "Maybe, but it's hard." "I know," she replied gently. "Still, sometimes a little patience goes a long way. He's trying." He just doesn't know how to show it yet. The rich man didn't move. He stood frozen, feeling something inside him shift. It was the first time in a long time that someone had defended him, not because they had to, not because they wanted something from him, but because they actually believed it. He leaned against the wall for a moment, overwhelmed by the quiet truth in her words. Why would she defend him? Why would she care? He had treated her with more impatience than anyone else. He had snapped at her the most. Yet she was the only one who didn't speak badly about him behind his back. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of shame mixed with gratitude, something that made his chest tighten. That evening he walked into the living room. The maid was dusting the shelves. When she saw him, she paused for a moment, unsure if she should continue or step aside. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, he just nodded slightly before walking past her. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of softness he had shown in days. That night he had trouble sleeping again. He lay awake thinking about what she had said. He's not a bad person. He is just under pressure. Why would she say something like that? Why couldn't she see the same anger everyone else saw? Why didn't she judge him like the others? Early the next morning, he came downstairs and saw breakfast already prepared on the table. The maid had set out his usual meal, the one she knew he liked on stressful days. A warm cup of tea sat beside his plate with another small note. Please take a moment to rest today. He stared at the note for a long time, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't name. For the first time, he felt guilty for how he had treated her. She had every reason to talk badly about him, to avoid him, to give up on him, yet she kept showing him care in small, quiet ways. During the day, he found himself watching her more closely, not in a suspicious way, but in a way that showed he was finally noticing her. He saw how she walked quickly from one room to another, making sure the house stayed in order. He saw how she handled things alone when other staff members avoided extra work. He saw how she picked up things people left behind without complaining, and every time she passed him, she gave a polite smile, even if she looked tired. A smile that felt almost like a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. But something about her looked different lately. Her eyes didn't shine as brightly as before. Her movements seemed slower, softer, as if she was carrying a weight heavier than the tasks she did. Sometimes she would take a deep breath, close her eyes for a moment, and then continue working. He began to wonder, was something happening in her life? Was she dealing with something she wasn't telling anyone? And why hadn't he noticed this before? Why had he been so lost in his own problems that he hadn't seen the quiet struggles happening right in front of him? One evening, he walked into the kitchen and found her rearranging some jars on the shelf. She looked more exhausted than usual. Her hands shook slightly, and she stopped to rub her forehead. For a second, he almost asked, "Are you okay?" The words reached the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them. He wasn't ready to show care. At least, that's what he told himself. The next day was even stranger for him. Every time he saw her, he felt a mix of guilt and concern. He tried to focus on work, but his mind drifted back to her over and over again. He didn't understand why it bothered him so much, why he suddenly cared about someone he had barely noticed before. Maybe it was because she was the only person who hadn't given up on him that night. While walking past the kitchen, he heard a soft sound like quiet sniffing. The door was slightly open. He paused, unsure if he should walk in or leave, but curiosity pulled him closer. He slowly pushed the door open and saw the maid sitting alone at the small table, her head down, her hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook gently. She was crying silently, trying not to make a sound. For the first time, he saw her not as his employee, not as someone who worked in his house, but as a human being with feelings, struggles, and a heart that had been hurting long before he noticed. He froze, not knowing what to do. Something inside him softened in a way he hadn't felt in years. Without realizing it, he took a step forward. Everything was about to change. He just didn't know it yet. When he stepped into the kitchen and saw her crying quietly at the small table, he didn't know what to do. It was the first time he had ever seen her break down. She was always calm, always steady, always carrying herself with quiet strength. Seeing her like that felt wrong, almost painful, as if something inside him cracked open. He stood there, unsure whether to walk in or walk away. A big part of him wanted to retreat, because feelings and emotions were things he had spent years avoiding. Another part of him, the part he had been ignoring for too long, pushed him toward her. He cleared his throat gently, hoping not to startle her. She lifted her head quickly and wiped her face, trying to hide the tears even though it was already too late. When she saw him standing by the door, she straightened up and whispered an apology, as if crying was something she wasn't allowed to do. He took a slow step forward. "Are you all right?" The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. He wasn't used to asking questions like that. His voice sounded softer than usual, almost unsure. She nodded too quickly. Yes, sir. I'm fine. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'll get back to work. She stood up as if ready to pretend nothing had happened, but he raised a hand gently, signaling her to sit back down. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He just felt something he hadn't felt around his staff in a long time. Concern. You don't have to hide it, he said quietly. If something is wrong, you can say it. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer, but then she took a shaky breath and spoke in a small voice. It's nothing you need to worry about, she said. I just got some news from home, that's all. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. It was the first time he had ever sat with her at the kitchen table. Usually, he was too busy, too stressed, or too absorbed in his own world to notice anything beyond his own problems. But right now, sitting across from her, he felt strangely present. What kind of news? He asked, trying to keep his tone gentle. She hesitated, her eyes filling with another layer of tears. She tried to blink away. A family member is unwell, she said quietly. I've been trying to manage things from here, but it's been difficult. And today it just felt heavier than usual. She tried to smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile that came from happiness. It was the kind of smile people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're strong. I didn't want to bother you with this, she continued. Everyone has their own problems. I didn't want to add mine. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He realized she had been carrying her own burdens silently, all while trying to keep the house running and making sure everything remained calm for him. She had been patient with him even when he had been unkind, and she had never once asked for anything in return. For the first time since he could remember, he felt ashamed, not the kind of shame that came from embarrassment, but the kind that came from realizing he had hurt someone who deserved nothing but kindness. I'm sorry, he said softly. The maid looked up, surprised. She had never heard him say those words to anyone in the house. Most people believed he wasn't capable of apologizing, but he meant it. You don't need to be sorry, she replied quickly. You've been under a lot of pressure. I understand that. People say things when they're stressed. It's okay, but he shook his head. No, it's not okay. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did. You didn't deserve that. Her eyes softened, and she looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. We all go through difficult days, she said gently. You're not a bad person. You're just overwhelmed. I could see that even when you were upset. Her ability to see goodness in him when he himself struggled to see it touched something deep inside him. They sat there in silence for a moment. The kitchen felt different now, warmer, softer, as if the honesty between them had changed the air around them. He noticed her hands trembling slightly. He wanted to help, but didn't know how. He had always lived in a world where problems were solved with money, instructions, or power. But this wasn't a problem that could be fixed with any of that. Have you eaten? He asked gently. She shook her head. I wasn't hungry. He stood up, walked to the fridge, and took out some leftover simple food she had cooked earlier that day. He heated it quietly, then placed the plate in front of her. She stared at it, surprised and unsure what to say. You should eat something, he said, even if it's just a little. She nodded slowly, touched by the gesture. As she ate quietly, he sat with her, not saying much but not leaving either. It felt strange for him to sit still, to simply be present, but somehow it felt right. This was the first time he was giving her even a fraction of the care she had shown him for years. After a while, she looked up and said, Thank you for sitting with me. I didn't expect that. He gave a small nod. I should have noticed earlier. You've been tired for days. I didn't ask. I was too caught up in myself. She shook her head gently. People don't always show when something is wrong. You were dealing with your own worries. That's okay. But you still looked after me, he replied quietly. Even when I didn't look after you. Her eyes softened again, and she exhaled slowly. Sometimes caring for someone doesn't need permission, she said. Sometimes we do it because it feels right. Her words sank deep into him. He didn't know why, but he felt something warm in his chest, a mixture of gratitude, guilt, and respect. She finished eating and stood up to wash her hands. He watched her, noticing the way her shoulders were still tense. Before she could walk away, he spoke again. If you need time off, I can arrange it, he said. You don't have to carry everything alone. She paused, her hand resting on the back of the chair. I appreciate that, she said quietly. But I'll manage. I just needed a moment. He nodded, though part of him still felt concerned. She gave him a small, tired smile before stepping out of the kitchen. When she left, he sat alone at the table, staring at the spot where she had sat. He felt a heaviness inside, but it wasn't the same heavy feeling he had been carrying for weeks. This was different. This was the heaviness of realization. He realized how blind he had been, not just to her struggles, but to the humanity of the people around him. He had been so wrapped up in his problems that he had forgotten others had problems too, some of them even bigger than his. That night, as he lay in bed, he replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over again. Her trembling hands, her quiet tears, the way she apologized for having emotions, as if she wasn't allowed to feel anything in his house. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. A desire to change. He didn't know how to fix everything all at once. He didn't know how to erase the ways he had hurt others. But he knew this. He didn't want to be the kind of person who made kind-hearted people cry in silence. That next morning would be different. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he felt something shifting inside him. A softer version of himself, one he thought he had lost long ago, was beginning to wake up. And the first step of that change started because of her, the only person who cared when he never asked her to. The next morning the house felt different. It wasn't anything big, just a small shift in the air, as if something heavy had finally lifted a little. The rich man woke up earlier than usual, but this time he didn't jump out of bed with frustration. He sat quietly for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened the night before. He had seen a side of the maid he never noticed. He had seen her as a real person, not just a worker moving around his home. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about business or money or deadlines. He was thinking about her, how she hid her emotions, how she kept working despite her own problems, how she defended him even when he didn't deserve it. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, something soft and unfamiliar. He got dressed slowly and went downstairs. The house staff were in the hallway, talking quietly the way they always did in the morning. But this time, when he approached, he didn't walk past them with a cold expression. He stopped. They all froze, waiting for him to complain about something, or give out instructions sharply as he usually did. But instead, he spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I want everyone to meet in the living room," he said. Just for a few minutes, the staff exchanged surprised looks. He never called them together like this unless something was wrong. They followed him hesitantly, unsure what to expect. He stood at the front of the room, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I owe you all an apology," he began. The room fell silent. Eyes widened. Someone almost dropped the tray they were holding. No one had ever heard him start a sentence like that. "I know I haven't been easy to work with lately," he continued. "I've let my stress take over, and I took it out on the wrong people. That wasn't right. You all work hard, and I haven't treated you with the respect you deserve." For a moment, none of the staff moved. They didn't know if this was real or if he was simply having another unpredictable day. But the sincerity in his voice couldn't be ignored. "I don't want this house to feel uncomfortable anymore," he said. "I want things to change, and I'm willing to start with myself." A few staff members nodded slowly. One of them softly said, "Thank you, sir." It wasn't much, but it was more than he expected. Then he looked toward the maid. She stood near the back of the room, her hands folded neatly, her expression calm but unsure. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she definitely wasn't used to hearing him speak. This gently, he met her eyes for a moment longer before turning back to the group. "That's all," he said. "Thank you." The staff returned to their work, whispering in disbelief. Some seemed relieved, others seemed hopeful, but almost everyone seemed stunned by the change in him. He walked toward the kitchen and found the maid preparing breakfast. She didn't look up as he entered, still unsure how to act after everything that happened. He stepped closer and spoke quietly. "I meant what I said." She nodded without turning around. "I know." He hesitated before speaking again. "I want to talk to you for a minute." She stopped what she was doing and turned to him slowly, her eyes soft but tired. He cleared his throat. "About what you told me yesterday. About your family. You don't have to go through that alone. You should take some time off. Go home, be with them. Don't worry about work." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I don't want to cause trouble. Things are already difficult for you." He shook his head. "This isn't about me. You've done more for this house than anyone else, and you've shown me more patience than I deserved. You need to take care of yourself too." She hesitated, torn between needing the time and feeling responsible for her job. But he stepped closer and spoke more firmly. "I insist. Take the time." She looked down for a moment, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about giving her time off. It was about showing her that he finally understood how much she mattered. Later that day, he asked the driver to take her wherever she needed to go. She packed a small bag, thanking the staff quietly before walking toward the door. When she stepped outside, he followed her, stopping at the entrance. "Take as long as you need," he said softly. "Don't rush back." She smiled gently, a real smile this time, one that warmed him more than he expected. "I'll return soon," she said. "Thank you for everything." As she got into the car and it drove down the long driveway, he stood there longer than necessary, watching the vehicle until it disappeared behind the gate. For the first time in years, the house felt too large, too empty, too quiet without her. He walked back inside, and the staff noticed a difference in him almost immediately. He didn't bark orders. He didn't raise his voice. He thanked people, something he rarely did. He even helped pick up a box one staff member was struggling with. They exchanged shocked glances but didn't question it. Days passed, and during those days, something inside him continued to shift. He found himself thinking about things he hadn't thought about before. The way he treated people, the way he carried stress, the way he let anger control him. He began working on himself quietly. He took short breaks during the day. He tried to listen more. He even started cooking small meals for himself, something he never did because he always relied on staff. He also found himself thinking about the maid, often the way she stayed calm when everyone else was nervous, the way she defended him, the way she hid her pain behind small smiles. He realized something important. She had been the only constant kindness in his life. 1 week later, he stood near the front window, staring outside. He didn't admit it out loud, but he was waiting for her, hoping she would come back soon, hoping she was doing okay, hoping she felt better. Then, one afternoon, he heard the front door open. He turned quickly and saw her stepping inside, carrying her bag in one hand. She looked tired, but there was something peaceful in her eyes too, like she had finally gotten a bit of the rest she needed. He walked toward her, feeling oddly nervous. "Welcome back," he said quietly. She gave him a small, warm smile. "It's good to be back, sir. How is everything?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Things are better now. Thank you for giving me the time." He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I'm glad you're here." She nodded once more, her smile widening just a little. "Me too." In that moment, something settled between them, not as employer and employee, not as someone powerful and someone quiet, but simply as to people who had learned to understand each other. He walked with her as she entered the house again, and the atmosphere felt lighter. The staff noticed it instantly. The house no longer felt like a place filled with tension. Instead, it felt warm, almost peaceful. Work continued as usual, but nothing was the same. The rich man was different, not perfect, not someone without flaws, but someone trying, someone learning, someone realizing the value of the people around him. He no longer snapped over small mistakes. He thanked the staff. He listened. He tried to be present, and every time he passed the maid in the hallway, he offered a gentle smile, one she always returned. She didn't say it out loud, but she noticed the change. She saw how he made an effort every day, and in her quiet way, she appreciated it deeply. He didn't say it out loud either, but he knew the truth. She had changed him more than any success or failure ever could. She taught him what kindness looked like. She taught him patience. She taught him that even someone who seems strong can be hurting silently. And most importantly, she taught him that being cared for doesn't always come from the people with the loudest voices, but from those with the gentlest hearts. And from that day forward, he made sure he never forgot that the house, once filled with tension, slowly became a place of warmth, respect, and understanding, not because the walls changed, but because he did. And it all began with the quiet patience of the one person. He never expected the maid who cared when no one else did.